Scammers usually just scam their marks, but today I'm exposing a scammer that is simultaneously scamming British citizens and all US taxpayers at the same time. Now, I've been taking down scammers for most of my professional career, and this is one of the worst I've seen. I've received several documents from victims of the scam, and I'll be showing you how this scam works today. But before I do, I need to mention that the perpetrator of this scam, Simon Goldberg, desperately wants to censor this information. He doesn't want people to know he's a scammer, and he really doesn't want people to know how he does the scamming. At the end of this video and on my website, I'll cover the things I've done to make sure the scammer gets the proper Streisand effect he deserves. Pandora's box has been opened, and it's not going to be closed on Simon the Scammer. Like all good scammers, Simon Goldberg likes to grant himself a pompous title. Simon has chosen the Spaniard for his nom de grift. It's a reference to the character played by Russell Crowe in the 2000 film Gladiator. You know, the one where he's a noble Roman general, betrayed, who has to fight for his life in a coliseum and eventually slays an emperor. Funnily enough, Simon also likes to call himself Paul Muad'Dib, one of the names of Paul Atreides, the main character from Dune, who coincidentally is betrayed, has to fight for his life, and eventually slays an emperor. We can see the pattern here. Simon likes to compare himself to heroic protagonists who live out messianic revenge fantasies. It's a self-mythologizing martyr complex where personal grievances become epic narratives. He's living in a grandiose fantasy where he alone is the chosen one. Will his next nom de grift be Neo? Maybe Harry Potter, Aragorn, or Aslan? The organization he invented goes by a number of names: Empower the People and You and Your Cash. From what I can tell, these are private member organizations. They make their money by making big promises to their members. And today, we're going to look through these documents and see if we can piece together just what these promises are that our Spaniard might be selling. This information is intended for those who feel misled by ETP and YAYC, particularly if you applied for the 1099 OID reclaim of direct debits. Now, in the first paragraph, this gives us a very big clue as to just what the nature of this organization's business is. 1099 OID refers to a form from the United States Internal Revenue Service. It's the form you would be sent if you had investments in treasury bills or government bonds that pays an amount of money on maturity. This is payment called a discount. I know the terminology is strange and counterintuitive, but the idea is that if you hold this kind of investment, you may be receiving a stream of income, and that has to be declared on your tax filings. At least if you're a U.S. citizen like me. That's what the 1099 OID form is for. This organization seems to be suggesting that you might be able to use it as a claim back money for British direct debit payments. If you've never heard of this, it's the British version of our ACH, Automated Clearinghouse. Both systems do essentially the same thing. It's how you automatically pay your utility bills, for example. So that leads to the question, why would a British person who has paid for stuff with this direct debit expect to get money back from the United States IRS? Why on earth would you expect to be getting money back from a payment from British customers who paid their gas bill? As the principal of the ITIN number, you are the one who holds the responsibility. ETP and YAYC act as agents on your behalf to file the necessary forms with the IRS. It's important to remember that you are in control of the process. This is very strange. This suggests that what these organizations are doing, what Simon Goldberg's group seems to be up to, is acting as an unlicensed tax document preparer. Normally the sort of thing you would ask a professional qualified accountant to do. But from what I can tell, these organizations have absolutely no credentials at all in the field of accountancy or bookkeeping. Please don't waste your money in an attempt to gain more money. It is crucial for you to take the time and check the IRS forms filled on your behalf. Fortunately, these forms are easily accessible if you need assistance. The IRS staff is always there to help and guide you through the process, especially if you're struggling to locate the filings. It sounds like the people who are running this organization are painting a very rosy picture of what it's like to interact with the United States IRS. I've never heard them described as helpful and willing to provide assistance. Dealing with the IRS is more about waiting on hold, reaching the wrong number, and a lot of getting nowhere fast. They are the polar opposite of accessible, and nobody who has ever dealt with the federal tax system thinks they are helpful. It's almost as if this is a polite way of saying that if something goes wrong with the process, we don't want to have to deal with your problem. If you discover that no filings have been made, it's a strong indication that something may have gone wrong. In that case, it's wise to take screenshots or even print out the available records for your future reference if you decide to claim against the agents. So that's suggesting to me that people pay money to this organization with the expectation of having forms filled in to reclaim a direct debit. But these people go and check on the IRS site and find that absolutely nothing has been filed. They paid a bunch of money to Simon Goldberg, and he just pocketed the money. He didn't do what he promised to do. And if that is what happens, then Simon Goldberg wants those people to blame the IRS and not him. It's a pretty sweet deal for Simon. He gets a load of money for doing literally nothing, and then when his customer, the member, discovers this, he blames the IRS and tells them to get lost in their automated phone system. This is your journey, and I'm simply crossing your path to offer some guidance and suggestions, wishing you the best of luck. I would hope to have more than luck if I was paying for that service. They're claiming that they can perform this rather valuable function, but they're really not offering much in the way of guarantee or support. If something goes wrong, they don't want you to bother them. They want you to bother somebody else. Best of luck. Well, that might be what you say to someone who is kayaking across the Atlantic Ocean. It doesn't sound like an accountant who is confident in their ability to fill in a routine tax document. The next document I want to look at is entitled Dear Members, 1099 OID Claimants. We are aware that everyone is very excited about the 1099 payment reclaim service, and with good reason. To date, even with the delays at the IRS, YAYC members undertaking 1099 claims are running at a 30% payout ratio filed to worked. While this is great news for us, we do have an update message from our chairman and service contractor, a little less enthusiastic in relation to your claims below. Now, first of all, this sounds astonishing. Claiming that 30% of people who fill out these forms receive a payout? Because that's strange, because the purpose of the 1099 OID form is to declare income. And if you have income, then the opposite is true. You have to pay tax on the additional income you declared. So how could an income declaration form result in a payment received from the United States government? Well, this is especially fishy because the people who this service is being advertised to are United Kingdom citizens. They didn't receive interest income for U.S. Treasury notes or anything that would cause a 1099 OID form to be issued. So they would have no reason to make an OID declaration to the United States government. If they did have income, they would declare their income to the British tax authorities instead, since that's where they live. It's an obvious question, and it's one that Simon really hopes nobody will ask. I know many of you have been chasing Ambia, and that needs to stop with immediate effect. Not only does it violate the contract you have with ETP and YAYC at Section 4, but it also causes unnecessary work and distraction. It's clear that once you've paid them the money, once you've started this process, you're kind of on your own. Don't call Ambia the office worker. This is obviously such a common occurrence that they amended their contracts to prohibit calling her. They really do not want to be bothered with your problems because they've already got your money. It does seem to be the sort of organization that's not particularly keen to help people once you have handed over the cash. Given that a large minority of ETP claimants have either been unable to read or adhere to the contract rules and conduct that we expect, with immediate effect I have informed Ambia that anyone chasing for an update and or sending unnecessary emails and or mithering with incompetence because of lack of diligence/laziness will categorically have their case moved to the bottom of the queue. So, if you had problems with Simon Goldberg's organization is doing, we're going to ignore you. The bigger the problem you have, the more desperate you are to get in contact with the administrative staff of this organization, the less we want to hear from you. That's the message I'm getting from the Spaniard. I dare anyone to test me on this one. I'm not here for money. I have kicked more than 30 people off site and canceled their 1099 claims because they chased when they shouldn't, or they asked stupid questions which could be answered by watching the presentation or reading the materials we provided you. It's really not difficult, and you ought to be vigilant and careful when submitting your information and or following simple instructions. Believe me, there were tears and there were complaints, but you know what? I don't care. And I'm more than happy to cancel the claims of those who disrespect the terms of their contract and or disrespect us. Those who act like children / without equity will be treated like children inequitably. So be warned, I have a very itchy trigger finger and I shoot without asking questions first. In this organization, you can be kicked out just for asking a question. He's already done it to 30 people. And you know what? I would have questions myself if I found that I was embroiled in something like this. The whole thing seems to be very, very questionable indeed. I trust I make myself clear. Anyone who does not understand the logic and common sense behind this policy, please contact me. Direct. We'll have a chat, and you'll see what happens to your membership. Simon is inviting you to ask a question, having told you what will happen if you dare to ask a question. And if you dare to ask that question, your membership will be rescinded, canceled, but Simon will keep the money. How much money? Keep watching because you will be astonished. This sound like no members organization I've ever heard of. Does this sound like a sensible and fair membership policy to you? Please, I just want to know, is this normal? I mean, I've never been in a membership organization like this, but having a policy where you can't ask questions and then inviting people to ask questions, knowing that the act of asking a question could get you kicked, well, it's obviously a contradiction. But it sounds like he's gaslighting his members. Let's have a look at this OID reclaim process. All members undertaking this benefit must have watched the 3-hour educational webinar. Wow, 3 hours of your life that you would not get back. But I would love to see this 3-hour webinar explaining just what the purpose of this 1099 OID reclaim process is. No wonder Simon wants to keep it secret. I'm sure the IRS Criminal Investigation Division would definitely find it educational. That's not the only sketchy thing about this process, though. In order to even get started, you have to hand over rather a lot of documents and just a bit of cash. You need to be a paid-up member of the organization. You need to have signed the non-disclosure agreement. You need to have applied for a United States individual tax identification number and hand over your passport. Oh, and you need to make a donation. They need to see your birth certificate, the details of your bank accounts and credit cards you have. So you're basically handing over a large amount of rather confidential personal information to this organization that is purporting to be able to provide some kind of accountancy service that has absolutely zero credentials in that department. Send an email with an advocacy Zoom session recording. So it sounds like your meetings with the advocate are recorded. The advocate seems to be the person who is selling the service on behalf of these organizations. It's the advocate's job to bundle the documents. He has to print them out with a color printer on white A4 paper and use a blue pen to sign the paperwork. I don't know why it's always blue pen in the world of conspiracy theories, but that just seems to be how this particular conspiracy cookie crumbles. Documents must not be folded. Dated in the American style month, day, year. And then the member receives the original documents from the United States IRS and their own passport back. It's rather a lot of trust to place in an organization that, in my opinion, hasn't done much to earn that trust. We're going to have a look now at the non-disclosure agreement. This is what you have to sign before you can be part of the 1099 OID reclaim service. The very first thing that stands out is that this is a very all-encompassing agreement. Literally, any material that has been provided by the organization must be kept secret by the member. I've never heard of an accountant who claims that their processes are a trade secret, or that they're working magical techniques that must not be disclosed by their customers. Accountants just execute a public tax code. There aren't any secret tax laws, so everything an accountant is supposed to do is public knowledge. And if you have the time and patience to read that tax code, it's all there. So how could the business of preparing tax forms be secret? But these guys are claiming that it's all intellectual property, defined in the widest possible way. They're also claiming that the marketing information is subject to NDA. So you're not allowed to say how you came to find out about these organizations. You're not allowed to talk about their business operations. So that could include how you feel when they failed to support you or threaten to kick you out of their organization just for asking a question. Of course, that's a business operation, isn't it? Product information. Well, that's secret too. In other words, you don't know what the product you're actually buying is until long after you've begun the process, long after you've made your donation, and being a fully paid up member. Only then, only once you've signed the NDA will they tell you what the product that you're actually buying is. Have you ever heard of such a financial product that works that way? That you have to pay first, only then will you learn what the scheme is? I don't think that is a government-approved financial product sales process, even in jolly old England. Proprietary computer code? Are they suggesting that they're going to give you some software to do this? I've not actually seen anyone mentioning that elsewhere. Computer systems technology, which includes all of the scientific technical information and or material, the information provider pertaining to any machine, appliance, or process. I think they've just had ChatGPT write this because none of it seems to make any kind of sense in the context of what they're actually providing. This seems like boilerplate NDA stuff that they just added to make it more frightening. This agreement shall continue in force indefinitely. So once you sign this agreement, you are forever silenced from talking about these organizations. But maybe that's the point. Simon doesn't want anybody talking about what his organization does. So he makes sure to take his money first, get people to sign the NDA, and when they find out they've bought magic beans, there's nothing they can do. Because this NDA is about ensuring the silence of the people who eventually become the victims of this organization. In the event of buyer's remorse, the recipient must destroy or return to the information provider all media containing confidential information and must irrevocably delete the confidential information from all computer systems and other technology devices. They don't want people reading documents, well, like the documents I've been showing you. This non-disclosure agreement may not be terminated. What, never? This is even longer than the 4 billion years the Church of Scientology requires members of their C organization to commit to. Once you sign it, you're stuck with it. They don't even want you to talk about this when you're 95 years old and dying on your deathbed. You still have to keep the secret. It's more secret than being a member of Brigade 77, British Military Intelligence, or the Canadian IATF. At least you're allowed to say which regiment you work for. With these guys, you have to keep the secrets until your death. One more document before we wrap up for today. This is the binding agreement of meeting of minds, otherwise titled the contract. This is also full of some very onerous conditions, but for the first time we see what the membership costs are. The standard membership is £1,500 per annum, so nearly $2,000. That's the amount of money you have to pay if you want them to perform this rather questionable 1099 OID process on your behalf. It's a lot of money, but look at that. It says you have to pay a success fee. So in the unlikely and very illegal chance that the member actually gets some money, you have to give a bunch of it to Simon Goldberg. And just how likely are you to succeed? Earlier, the Spaniard suggestion that 30% of members were receiving payouts, but here he's perhaps managing expectations downward. Unforeseen obstacles and delays aside, the service user should expect to receive a 1099 check, brackets, the check, within 6 months of the 1099 being lodged with the IRS. The service provider may time the lodgement of the service user's claims so as to facilitate the best possible chance of success. Therefore, the service user should not assume that the claim is lodged immediately upon return of the signed documentation. So in other words, when you return the documents, when you give the money and hand over that donation, then you're not obliged to do anything. They're not. And if they do something, it's probably not going to work. And if it doesn't work, well, that's just an unforeseen circumstance. It pretty much seems foreseeable to me that none of this will work and that this is just a get-out clause. The service user promises and agrees not to harass and bother either the service provider or the service facilitator with emails, questions, and/or requests for updates. Breach of this term may result in immediate cancellation of the service user's claim without a refund of the fee. This is a bit rich coming from the man who claims to be not about the money. If you so much as ask a question, he will terminate your membership, not perform the service you paid for, but he will keep all the money that you have paid. A considerable amount of money, £1,500 per year. The service user accepts that once the 1099 has been lodged with the IRS, the matter is entirely in the hands of the IRS, and the IRS will process the 1099 at its own pace, which could take longer than 6 months, as has been experienced with the effects of the COVID-19 and the global work from home initiatives. Well, they're taking rather a lot of money just for filling in a form and then taking absolutely no responsibility for what might happen afterwards, such as the very real possibility that this claim is flagged as bogus and the person making the claim finds themselves in legal hot water. I don't see anything in any of these contracts offering to help people if, as a result of following Simon's instructions, they find themselves in legal trouble. Clause 9. The rate of the exchange in pound amount of the success fee is to be agreed by Simon or Simone, and on the day that the service user issues the success fee. So what I think this is saying is that regardless of what the prevailing exchange rate between dollars and pounds or dollars and euros is, Simon and Simone, who are the proprietaries of this organization, are able to set whatever exchange fee they like. So they could make it so that the exchange fee effectively means that you have to send all of the money. There's no limit on what the exchange fee could be. There's no requirement that the exchange fee for transactions be reasonable. This one is weird. Service user undertakes and agrees not to make any attempt whatsoever to identify Paul Muad'Dib or to make contact with Paul Muad'Dib, brackets, the expert. In the event of violation by the service user agrees that both the service facilitator and the service provider are absolved and discharged from all obligations, and the service user will forfeit the fee. Not only will asking questions get you kicked out of this organization, but trying to figure out who is in charge of the organization, whose advice you are following, well, that's also a capital offense. If you're trying to dig into who authored these documents or who's behind the 1099 OID scheme, you'll find yourself ghosted, bounced from the VIP list before you even hit the club's entrance. No questions of any kind will be tolerated. This is just not a thing you're allowed to do. Clause 17. The service user accepts that all official tax forms completed by the service provider as part of the process to obtain a check are the intellectual property of the service provider and may not, cannot, will not be disclosed to any third parties at any time in the past, present, or future. Now, excluding the possibility that one of the Spaniards' members has access to the TARDIS and is able to somehow send these documents back to the past, I think what he's actually saying is that they're just not allowed to show the document that he's filled in on your behalf to a professional accountant or possibly even law enforcement. I think that's the real purpose of this agreement. And it's rather strange because the Spaniard, otherwise known as Paul Muad'Dib and the expert, seems to be asserting that there's some kind of rather vague and non-specific intellectual property over what actually is a public domain document issued by the United States government. How could an OID tax form be copyrighted? And from what I can tell, a British unlicensed tax document preparer. The service user accepts and agrees that at no time whatsoever will copies of the completed tax form scanned or otherwise be retained by or shared by the service user in the unlikely event that a question arises from the IRS. All inquiries, queries, issues will be referred back to the service provider via the service facilitator for handling. So what that means is if the IRS flags you for having made a frivolous or illegal claim, abusing the OID process, you're not allowed to have a copy of your own document. You can't keep those documents to show the police or the relevant authorities that it wasn't your idea. You didn't fill these documents in. They don't want any evidence at all of what they've been doing in the hands of potentially disgruntled former members. Now, this doesn't seem like a legitimate way of running a financial service, but it does sound like something you might want to do if you wanted to operate under the radar. If you wanted to make sure that nobody had evidence of precisely how your scheme worked and the kinds of things that you were getting members to do. Clause 19. In taking up this service, the service user agrees and promises that all present and future claims of this type will only be made or lodged through the service facilitator and service provider, and at no time whatsoever will the service user seek to either replicate the process or re-engineer the process, or try the process himself, herself, themselves, or go elsewhere to have the process completed. So what they're saying is that no matter how dissatisfied you might be with this service, or how satisfied you are, you're not allowed to fire them and then appoint a professional accountant to complete your tax preparation. And if it works, you're not allowed to go do it yourself again or tell somebody else how to do it. You've got to stick with them. You're stuck with them for the rest of your life. And you're not allowed to tell anyone what you've been through or what it was that they're trying to make you do. Sign only if you agree to be bound in all jurisdictions, including but not limited to legal jurisdiction, and if you intend to enter into contractual binding relations, including but not limited to legal relations. I have absolutely no idea what this means, but I think they're suggesting that they might be resorting to extra legal means in order to enforce this contract, perhaps. It's so vague and threatening, isn't it? So there are some of the documents that I've received from disgruntled former members of Simon Goldberg's organizations, and I can only speculate as to what they all mean, but here is my attempt to try and make sense of it all. These organizations present themselves as quite normal conspiracy theory groups with some membership options. The purpose of the conspiracy theory content is to hook people in. He wants people who are predisposed to this kind of countercultural thinking. They're more likely to be the kinds of marks on people who could be made to accept one of these rather unorthodox schemes. But critically, if you're the sort of person who resonates with all the sovereign citizen stuff, then you probably don't have the best relationship with law enforcement anyway. Maybe you don't even think that laws exist, which makes you the perfect kind of victim for what happens next. When you sign up for this organization, it begins with a 3-hour briefing of some kind. That sounds like a hard sell that promises the services that they claim to be able to deliver. But in order to actually get to the detailed information about what it is they do for you, you have to give a donation. You have to be a paid member. You have to sign this non-disclosure agreement that promises to keep everything secret you've just learned. Everything you've just learned after paying the money. And what do they do for the money? In return for you handing over all your personal details, it seems that they are filing U.S. tax documents with a promise that it could somehow give you a rebate on money that you've spent via the United Kingdom direct debit, like a utility bill. It's clearly a nonsensical promise that perhaps would only appeal to somebody who is very unfamiliar with how the tax code actually works, possibly somebody who is both ignorant and in a lot of debt. They're looking for people who are easily led into this kind of scheme, and I think that's the real purpose of the NDA. It's there to force people to keep secret. It's there to threaten people into silence because once you know the secrets, you're potentially a threat to Simon's money-making scheme. So they need a way of keeping you quiet. And maybe the sort of person who might be fooled into joining this organization, the sort of person who might hand over such a large amount of money, might also be the person who is ignorant of how contractual law and non-disclosure agreements work. They might not know that you can't use an NDA to silence people when you suspect that a crime or some kind of civil tort has occurred. And that's what is going on here. These are my guesses based on the documents I have read and the testimonies of some of these former members that I've spoken to. I'm not an accountant, nor am I a lawyer or any kind of financial expert. And if you are, though, I would love to know what you think is going on here. If you have some financial expertise, maybe you can explain to me just what this organization is up to, and is it legal? Is there any recourse for members who were promised so much? And if there's somebody watching who works for the IRS, please contact me, mctoon at mctoon.net. I will send you all these documents, along with Simon's contact details. I'm sure he'd just love to share that 3-hour educational webinar with you. I've put a copy of all the documents I've received on archive.org. Now, I know that Simon isn't going to want them up there, but archive.org is just the kind of organization that will thumb their nose all day long at people like Simon who are trying to get stuff removed. It's not going anywhere. Anyway, a link to that is on my website, mctoon.net/Simon Goldberg. If you want to look at the documents, you can pop down there, and then you'll just find them over on archive.org.